All right, we are good to go. Welcome everybody to the Worldhoppers channel. This is a collaborative booktube channel where we talk about sci-fi and fantasy books. And today we're going to be talking about, oh, I forgot to say, and all of our proceeds and AdSense money goes to charity. Today we're going to be talking about underrated fantasies, and I'm super excited about this because we've got a lot of new faces here today. I know some of you are familiar with, obviously, myself and with Angela from Literature Science Alliance. She's been in a few of our videos before, but everybody else is a new face. So we're going to start by going around and introducing ourselves, and they're going to tell us a little bit about their channels so we know, what kind of books they read. And Jenna, you can go ahead and start.
All right. Hi, my name is Jenna. My channel name is Bibliofilth, and I read mostly science fiction and fantasy and a lot of comics, both manga and Western comics.
My name is Chris. My channel is Chris Bookish Cauldron, and I read a lot of fantasy, and I read a decent amount of contemporary literary fiction and historical fiction. I feel like my reading has shifted a lot more towards fantasy in the last 2 years on the channel, but I still read those other genres.
And I am Reija from the channel The Bookfinch, and I am a Finnish booktuber, so I read a lot of fantasy, some science fiction. I'm foraying into science fiction now, and also a huge lot of manga. And I also read a lot of translated fiction. And my pronouns are they, them.
I'm Shannon. My channel is That's So Poe. I use pronouns she, her. I read pretty eclectically across kind of every genre, but I do read a lot of SFF as well as historical fiction, romance, all sorts of age groups too. Lots of kids' books, middle grade, as well as adult.
I didn't know you read romance. That's interesting.
I read a lot of romance.
Oh, actually, I think I did know that because your mom's a big romance reader too. If you guys don't know, Shannon's my cousin, actually. So that's why I knew that her mom reads romance. So we're going to start by just talking about where we find underrated fantasy recommendations. And just to be honest, these people are the people that I get a lot of underrated fantasy recommendations from. That's why I asked them to be in this video. But I am super excited to see what books they're going to recommend today. I have a feeling my TBR is going to explode, in the words of Angela. She said that the other day. Because they all read things that I have often not heard of or are not talked about a lot on BookTube. So I'm super excited about that, but I'm also very curious where they find their underrated fantasy recommendations.
Well, I'm Angela, pronouns she, her, and where I find them from is primarily BookTube or book bloggers. So back before I knew there was a BookTube, I was getting kind of bored with what's always at the bookstore. It's the same, well, it's better now, but 5 years ago, it was the same 10 authors. And so I would just search online, I would type in keywords. And now on BookTube, some of my favorite people are Jocelyn from Yogi with a Book, Injiri from Onyx Pages, Audrey from Perpetual Pages. A lot of the books that I'm going to be telling you guys about, I was either personally recommended them by these people or I saw it on one of their recommendation videos. And they specifically read really diversely, which is what I focus on in my reading now, which unfortunately tends to be the underrated books are the more diverse books, which hopefully will change slowly through time, but that's what you're going to find on my list and what I kind of do.
All right. And then I have a feeling a lot of people are going to say BookTube is where they find recommendations, which is where I do as well. But I also have had a lot of luck on Twitter by following authors that I really, really like, because they will also share books that they're reading or fellow authors that they interact with. And that tends to be more of a niche, especially when you get into fantasy and specific fantasy subgenres. Following an author that you like on Twitter is a great way to find other books that are similar to the books that they have written. So I use that very frequently. If I like a book, I'll go follow the author on Twitter if they have one.
That's a really good tip.
Mm-hmm. Like everyone, I a lot of BookTube, and all the channels that have been mentioned I watch and love. In addition, I find that I get a lot of recommendations from the channel Katie over at Kitty G. And then a lot over Rachel at Culinati. Every time she uploads a video, I find, especially science fiction, because I don't read as much science fiction, and she reads a lot of older authors and stuff like that, and backlist titles, and it's really a great resource. So yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about all the channels I watch, but in addition to BookTube, I also find that I am a firm believer in the used bookstore. And if you have a used bookstore in your area and you just kind of like scour the used bookstore, and specifically if you know like a certain group of authors that you like, you know what I'm trying to say? If you look on the backs of books sometimes from like the 90s or 80s and they have those authors on them, like every time I go to the used bookstore and I pick up a book that has like a blurb on it from Robin Hobb, I'm like, well, I'm going to read it. You know what I mean? And so a lot of times that's where I found some older recommendations, but I also like book blogs. I really like the book blog fantasyliterature.com, which is edited by a woman named Kat Hooper. Her Goodreads is also an amazing place to find recommendations. She reads really widely, a lot of backlists, new titles. There's a lot of places. There's a Fantasy Hive. It's another fantastic book blog, and the Fantasy Inn. So there's just so many book blogs. Also, authors' Goodreads. If you like an author, you can go to their Goodreads page. Many of them are Goodreads users themselves. They rate and review books. And Sherwood Smith is an author who reads a ton on Goodreads and posts a lot of reviews. And I always am really interested in what she's reading, and I find new book titles from her a lot.
I'm already writing things down. This piece of paper for my notes is going to get out of hand.
I'm basically seconding everything that everyone else has said and adding that conventions are some of the places where I get a lot of book recommendations. Before the Panini times, I was a huge attendee of conventions, and now I do a lot of like virtual conventions. Like every time there's a virtual convention, like FireCon, for example, I try to attend. And usually I will just sit there with my notepad and jot everything that everyone is mentioning down. So usually I will have a pretty extensive list after a good convention.
Do you have like a favorite convention for finding book recommendations? The only convention I've ever been to is Gen Con, which does have a writer symposium, but it's more focused on the craft than like books in a lot of ways.
Internationally, my favorite is probably Worldcon, because that's the only like really international one that I have been able to attend. In Finland, there is FinCon, which is the like biggest Nordic convention, which like is organized every year, and that's where I found out mostly about like English like non-translated authors. Because I went there a lot and got to do a lot of networking and stuff. But basically, if you are not sure about any like conventions, just Google like, for example, SFF convention and your like state or area, and usually that will give you an overview of what kind of like events are being organized near you. Also, libraries are very good for getting recommendations. I basically do a lot of shelf browsing on the fantasy sections.
I miss those days. I used to love just taking up random things at the library.
Yes, those were the days.
Yeah, they'll send me emails, and sometimes it'll just be a pretty book cover, and I'll have not heard of that book. And like that happened with an anthology I read this year, Love After the End, which is a really great anthology, but it was just from the library.
Yeah, I feel like so much of what I read these days are not underrated because I hear about them on BookTube, and that's why I want to read them. And so now when I hear about books or see a book in a bookstore or at the library that I actually haven't heard of, it actually like piques my interest because there, you know, I am aware of so many books because of BookTube. And so when I find something that I'm not aware of, usually it's just like an older book, but still, especially at the bookstore, if it's not an older book and it's one I haven't heard of, I'm like, what is this?
I'm like everybody here, right? I really get a lot of my recommendations from BookTube, and I try to follow a lot of smaller booktubers because sometimes, there's a lot of like really niche readers. For example, I think that Butch Poetics, who is a non-binary Norwegian, booktuber who really focuses on SFF and things to do with disability and to do with gender and all sorts of things. They have like the coolest recommendations. So like I love watching those smaller channels who read things that is definitely not mainstream. And there's also non-mainstream conventions like WisCon, which is like over Memorial Day weekend each year, not this year because of pandemic stuff. But they do like a focus on SFF with like looking at gender and marginalization and all sorts of things. They give out the Otherwise Awards, if you've heard of that. Yeah, so like some of these more niche booktubers and niche conventions and also niche literary magazines. So things like Violet Mag, right? So when you read short stories, sometimes you'll get exposed to a lot of different authors and you'll think, oh, I really love that author's writing. And then you'll go see, do they have anything else? And Angela and I actually just we read an anthology collection called Sunspot Jungle, Volume 2. And there were so many different authors. And it was one of those like, oh, I want to look into that author. I want to look into that author. So I think short stories, if you like them, reading literature magazines and reading anthologies is such a great way to get new authors.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking like, yeah, I've read Sunspot Jungle Volume 1 and 2, and the amount of global authors I've been exposed to from those collections, which like they're each 500 pages, so it's not a small feat, but it was really great.
Are those books available like just anywhere, or do you have to? Because I know sometimes anthologies get published and they're kind of like
you can get it in
Kickstarted and
paperback.
stuff.
You can get it in paperback or ebook pretty easily.
Okay.
You can't get the special editions, which have the pretty art, so you're not going to get the pretty art. But
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely second the looking for smaller booktubers. Like as you guys were naming people, I was like, oh yeah, that's a good tip too. I mean, not that big booktubers don't talk about underrated things. They sometimes do, but a lot of times they talk about popular things, and that's in some ways how they become popular, right? The booktubers. And I think that a lot of people just scratch the surface of booktube and don't realize how vast booktube really is. There are a lot of really small channels that read whatever they want to read and not necessarily what's popular. So definitely delve into some of those smaller booktube channels and see who they're shouting out, because a lot of times it's other smaller booktube channels too. But yeah, there's like so much booktube out there. And if you really want to find underrated books, I think that, looking for some smaller channels that have like niche reading taste, like Shannon was saying, is a great way to go.
And if you find a book that is very niche that you like, try to find who's reviewed it. Sometimes, sometimes you can just find a channel by finding people who have reviewed the books that you like because they've got somewhat similar reading tastes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off with recommendations. So the first one I have is actually more of an author than a specific book. And while I think people have heard of this author before, so she writes mostly, or wrote, she's no longer with us, sadly. I always hate when authors die. Obviously when anyone dies. But that's Diana Wynne Jones. She has a huge backlist, and she writes mostly middle grade. I think a lot of people have heard of Howl's Moving Castle. It's definitely her biggest book, or like most popular book, but she has a huge backlist. And I will say it's been a while since I've read any Diana Wynne Jones, but I've loved everything of hers that I have read. I remember I think the first thing of hers I read, I was like in the 4th or 6th grade. So I can't totally stand by this, but the Dale Mart Quartet was what caught my eye from her. But then when I was in high school and even in college, I was reading through her Chronicles of Crestomancy series, which is a really fun series about if you like books that are set in worlds with like parallel universes sort of thing. And it's about this it's a person who has this position called being the Crestomancy, and they're kind of in charge of all of the different realities and making sure everything goes well in them. And so he kind of hops between the different realities and stuff. And I always like reading things about alternate universes because it's so fun to see what things are different and what decisions made different outcomes and things like that. So that's a really fun series. But she also, some people might have heard of the Dirkholm series, the Dark Lord of Dirkholm. She's got a huge backlist, basically, and I don't think enough people really talk about her. Like, I was looking at the number of reviews on Goodreads, and other than Howl's Moving Castle, they're pretty low. So partially probably because they're older, but I am just a huge fan of her books, and I want to go and read more of her stuff because she has a huge backlist, and it is mostly middle grade or like younger YA, but I really enjoy her writing.
Nice. Yeah, when I was making this list, I was definitely trying to I have a couple sections. I have one where they don't have a lot of ratings on Goodreads and no one talks about them and they're never at my bookstore, and that's what I'm starting with. And this is an author also I think everyone is sleeping on, and this is Karen Lord's Redemption in Indigo. And Shannon knew this was going to be my first one.
This was on my list, but I was like, Angela's going to talk about it. So.
Yeah, I'm obsessed. Whoa, my camera went weird. I'm obsessed with Karen Lord. I finally bought her other 2 books. There's only 4 out. She does sci-fi and fantasy. She's a Caribbean author in Barbados. Her authorial voice is my favorite thing. It's kind of funny, but also a very storyteller, especially in this work, which is a Caribbean retelling. So if you like retellings in your fantasy, but you're tired of reading another Beauty and the Beast retelling, you could read Redemption in Indigo. This is the UK cover, by the way. Don't be fooled by the US cover. The US cover makes it look serious. And I'm like, I don't understand the US cover whatsoever. But this is just a very whimsical adult fairy tale retelling based off Caribbean folklore. It has a lot of stuff that I really love. Like I said, the storytelling narration, but also there is that whole immortal being who gets to interact with a mortal and all that stuff that we love when we read in middle grade or young adult, but it's all very adult. I think you could read this to a kid or a teenager, but I loved it. I adore everything by Karen Lord, and everyone's sleeping on her. If you like Jemison, if you like Butler, if you like Hopkinson, you need to read Karen Lord. She's also an incredibly intelligent woman. She teaches at the PhD level to a lot of grad students in physics and sociology. Can you tell she's one of my favorite authors? So she had to be on this list. And this only has 2,406 ratings on Goodreads.
It's so good, you guys.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, did I miss anything, Shannon?
I think just really emphasizing that this book is so fun. It's so hilarious. I laughed constantly while reading it. So I think the comparison to Jemison and Butler and everything really makes sense in terms of a lot of the kind of themes and intelligence that's in it, but it's so funny. It's just really lighthearted, and myth, if you like folklore, it's so good.
It's also so short. So if you're done with people recommending really long things, which I'm sure we'll also recommend because it's fantasy, but this is less than 300 pages. You could knock this out in a weekend easy.
I just bought it. Couldn't help myself.
I'm already set. My afternoon is made. Everything's perfect.
Yeah, the only book I've heard of by this author is The Best of All Possible Worlds, and even that only has 4,000 ratings on Goodreads.
I mean, if I could have talked about that book, I would have, but that's a science fiction book, so I didn't put it on my list.
Okay. I just pulled her up on my Goodreads, and that was one that I had already put on my Goodreads.
And The Best of All Possible Worlds, is this a famous quote? Yeah, it's okay. I thought so.
I think so, because whenever I search it, it comes up with some white person saying
it's some famous white dude. Yeah, I don't remember who, but
yeah.
All right. For my recommendation, I am going to recommend a comic because I can't resist doing that. But this is Fangs by Sarah Andersen, which is a really quick, very lighthearted read. That's a paranormal romance between a vampire and a werewolf. So it's a lot of comedy about these two characters entering into a relationship and how that would function if, one person has to drink blood and the other person transforms into a wolf every month. It's also more or less like a webcomic or old school newspaper strip style comic. So it's not really got a very cohesive, in-depth narrative that you have to pay attention to. You can just pick it up and read it page by page at a time. And it also is very pretty. That's not the only reason why you should read a book. But
it's always a bonus.
Yeah.
Is it by the same Sarah Andersen who does Sarah Scribbles?
Why, yes, it is. Yeah,
Yes.
That's a very popular webcomic. You've probably seen those around. They pop up in nerdy spheres a lot because she makes a lot of jokes about reading and buying too many books, which I'm sure is something no one here can relate to at all.
Not at all.
I've never done such a thing, and I'll never be accused of it.
No.
The huge bookcase behind.
That's why I came to film in my office, so I wouldn't be accused of such things.
I want to pick that one up. I'm always trying to find more like graphic novel and comics and stuff like that, and they just tend to be like expensive, and then my library doesn't stock a lot of them, and so like I have to be kind of like selective about which ones I'm gonna pour my money into. But that sounds really fun.
Yeah,
Is your library good with interlibrary loan?
It might be. I'm actually moving in a month to a much larger library system, so we'll see.
Yeah, I never use interlibrary loan. I should do that more often.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just got Silvia Moreno Garcia's short story collection,
Oh, wow.
which I couldn't get normally, but interlibrary loan, guys.
Are we ready for me?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is one that I found by literally just browsing the used bookstore, and I saw the cover of it, and it was a cheesy 90s fantasy cover, and I just couldn't help myself, and then I read it, and it's freaking brilliant, and I do not understand how more people are not reading it, and it is Rules of Ascension by David B. Coe. See if I can get it there. It's the first book in the Winds of the Fourlands Quintet, which I've read all of, and they're all amazing. If you like things like a Game of Thrones with lots of political intrigue, big cast of characters, lots of world building, this is a series I think you would love. It's set in a world where there's two races of people, Kiersey people who are magical, but they have limited physical stature. And they don't live as long because every time they use magic, it takes a little bit of time off of their lifespan. And then there's normal people or non-magical people called Eondi. Eondi have dominated the population because they reproduce easier, and they have really subjugated the Kiersey quite a bit. The Kiersey all have very different magical powers. Like no two Kiersey would necessarily have the same combination of magical powers, all this different stuff. But the one thing that really unites a lot of them is that almost all of them have some affinity towards divination. And because of that, they're oftentimes sought after by the Eondi nobles to be like counselors and stuff like that. And so there's all these like rifts between the two people, and then like Kiersey people who end up becoming counselors sometimes get looked down upon by their own people because they're like, why are you working for these people that subjugate us? All this different stuff. And what ends up happening in this book is there's a very complicated line of succession in this world, because instead of the like king always being from the same family, a class of like ruling families always like rotate who gets to be next in line for the throne. And pretty soon all these people who are Eondi start dying in mysterious ways, where it looks like other noblemen have it, are responsible, and it's this giant conspiracy, and nobody knows who's responsible for all of these mysterious deaths, but it's pretty clear to the reader that there is some sort of magical Kiersey conspiracy against them. And it follows like two main characters-ish, but there's lots of other side characters. And it's just great. Like, there are characters in this book where you will love them at the beginning and hate them by the end of the series. You will hate characters at the beginning and love them by the end of the series. There's like female romances in this book that are just kind of like accepted, and like you get their perspective, and like there's lots of tumultuous times between all these different relationships because everybody's on different sides. And yeah, it's got some of the most complicated politics I've ever read, to be honest. Like, I would recommend taking out the piece of pen and paper every once in a while, but it's really worth it.
Did you say it's the fourth book in a series?
No, first. Sorry.
First. Oh, okay. What was the name of it?
Winds of the Fourlands.
It has less than 2,000 ratings, and it came out like in 2000 something. That's so ridiculous.
It's so good.
I feel like I've read something by that author, like a Hawkmage series.
He wrote, you might have, his first series was called The Lone to Bean Chronicle, and it has a picture that I have it back there somewhere. The first book has a picture of like an eagle on a guy's shoulders. That might be it.
Yeah, I've read there's like a Hawkmage trilogy. And it had very intricate politics as well. So
yeah. It's very detailed, and it's one of those worlds where you can like really visualize it as you're reading, which I really, really appreciate. And yeah, just love it.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Okay, so my recommendation is going to be completely different. I'm going to recommend a Finnish book because I can. This is Troll, a Love Story by Johanna Sinisalo. Depending on the publisher, it may also be called Not Before Sundown, which was the original Finnish title was Not Before Sundown. And it was the 2004 winner of the Otherwise Award. But I never hear anyone talk about it ever. So I have to recommend it because, first of all, it is one of the first queer novels that I have ever read. The main character is a photographer, a gay man, and he finds a troll one night and takes it in. And it's kind of like a modern contemporary but fabulist story that's interspersed with chapters of this man taking care of the troll and navigating his life, but also with media excerpts of him trying to find out more about trolls, which in this world are endangered species in Finland. It's like a primate species, essentially. And it's an interesting take on the whole idea of changelings. And it also touches on things like immigration and especially white men going to Southeast Asian countries, getting wives. And one of the point of view characters is a woman who is originally from Thailand and is basically stuck inside her apartment because of this abusive husband. And it kind of I found it interesting because it's such an early 2000s work in Finland, but it also touches on topics that are not even today touched upon, like this idea of giving voice to LGBTQ voices and also immigrants, which is not something that is often done in Finland. So that's my recommendation.
I have really poor listening skills. What was that called again?
So it's Troll, a Love Story.
Troll, a Love Story. Okay.
This is what it is on Goodreads. It's Not Before Sundown with this cover, Chris.
Yeah. It's it has two different English publishers. So it's either Troll, a Love Story or Not Before Sundown.
I was looking on Wikipedia for the Otherwise winners and I found it under that title.
Yeah. That it was published first with that title, and the I think Troll, a Love Story is the US version, so they kind of changed it, and it's kind of also it's not a love story, so I don't know why they call it a love story. It's more it's more like a caretaker situation. It's more like parenting. I don't know what the love story is, but anyway, that's
the covers are very different.
Yeah,
I found both of them, and one's like a forest, and one's like a kid jumping off the bed. But I think it's what you were saying, a changeling thing.
Yeah. Marketing.
So
it's
good,
weird.
though.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited. I have it on. It's on my want to read now. It's one step closer to in my hands.
So I think first book I'll recommend is one that I think a lot of people have heard of, but haven't read, which is Realm of Ash. So this is the second book. It's a companion novel in the Ampa duology. First one is Empire of Sand. Yeah. I was I bet there's a couple of books here that I know you have read and loved on my list. So I'm I bet we'll have some overlap there. But this ended up being just kind of one of my favorite books of the decade. It did everything that I love. I really, really like this. Basically, this is set in a fantasy world that is inspired by Mughal India. And Mughal India was from the 14th to 18th centuries in India. And it's all about two groups of people, basically. There is the Amhan Empire, which kind of represents the Mughals, who are an invading empire that came and conquered the local people, the Amrithi, who have this kind of desert magic. And this book follows a woman who has a mother who was of those Amhan people, but her father of the Amrithi people, but her father was of the Amhan. And she grows up in this colonial Amhan empire, except that after she gets married, her husband ends up dying and she becomes a widow, and she is considered worthless. She's like a ghost in their society because widows without their husbands, they're nothing. But she needs to find purpose. And so she finds that the Empire can use her Emrethi blood in order to regain some of the power that they have lost. And so she goes on this crazy, I mean, it's actually a very slow pace, but it's just so intense journey of understanding that kind of push and pull between the Empire and between her heritage with the Emrethi. And it's got all of these excellent explorations of women's roles in these kind of patriarchal societies. And it's got such cool magic. This realm of ash is this sort of magical dream world that she can go into to access the memories and abilities of her ancestors. And it's just like full of such cool magic and epic scale and questions of empire. And it also is a really beautiful love story. So it's not like kind of the romance of will they, won't they type of thing. It's just about a partnership that she forms where it's super supportive and all about kind of figuring out how to be the best people you can be. And this is like absolutely the best. And I think everybody should read it. I don't understand why it has so few ratings. I really love it.
Yeah, I've heard such good things about that duology. And Tasha Suri has a new book coming out in June called The Jasmine Throne. And I think I'm going to read that one first before I read the duology. But I've heard really good things about the duology.
I am so excited about The Jasmine Throne. If anybody reads romance, Talia Hibbert, who's like a kind of a big new voice in romance, she has reviewed The Jasmine Throne and said it was even better than Realm of Ash and Empire of Sand, which she loved, and said it's like her ideal fantasy romance. So I'm just like so over the moon.
It's on my TBR for June. I'm very pumped. The Jasmine Throne. I have an arc. I need to read that.
Me and Rhea actually buddy read The Empire of Sand.
Yes.
And now, my question for the Realm of Ash, it follows her sister, right? Is
Yes.
that the case? Okay.
Yes.
I thought that was how it worked.
So for me, The Empire of Sand was a little bit like, I gave The Empire of Sand like 4.5 stars. I really, really liked it, but I felt that it had a couple of issues with, like, I really don't like when the characters make decisions that are like, they don't seem they fit the characters, or it seems like sometimes there's a couple of things that maybe like are too convenient or play out too, I don't know, like just a little bit too drama. But I felt like there were just those little issues in Empire of Sand and Realm of Ash for me. It just really flowed so much more cohesively. And I just thought it was real refinement of her technique. So, and yes, it follows the sister.
I own it. I just need to get to it.
Yeah.
Same. I really liked Empire of Sand.
Okay,
It was one of my favorites.
The next one I want to talk about, where did it go? Sorry, I have all of them pulled up on Goodreads next to me. It's another older one that I read pre-BookTube. And I wasn't actually sure if it was underrated until I pulled it up on Goodreads. And it's always hard to know on Goodreads if something's underrated just because it's older or what. But this is another, I don't know. I think some people might consider it middle grade and some people would consider just like the younger end of YA. Because, you know, over the years, YA has kind of like aged up. So what used to be considered YA is kind of like a gray area. Anyways, I want to recommend the Bartimaeus series, or the Bartimaeus sequence by Jonathan Stroud. If you guys don't know, I'm pregnant and like I forget words constantly. So that's why I have everything pulled up, because I will forget the name of an author at the drop of a hat. And usually I'm like really good about that stuff. Anyways, the first book is called The Amulet of Samarkand, and it is it has djinn in it. So it's like magic that has a magical world. Maybe it's supposed to be like our world, but there's djinn, and it's kind of got like a, I don't know, like a 1920s sort of feel. It's been a long time since I've read it. But I remember really enjoying this whole series, and I like the main character. And more recently, I have read and loved Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, which was kind of really popular when it came out. And that series, or that book, reminded me a lot of the Bartimaeus trilogy. And so if you guys enjoyed that one, I would recommend giving this older series a shot. And it definitely, the first one only has 5,000 reviews or ratings on Goodreads. So it seems like it's kind of underrated. I definitely don't hear people talking about it these days, but it is an older series. And I don't really hear people talk about Jonathan Stroud that much, even though he's still publishing some things. He's also written the Lockwood & Co. series, which I think is like a middle grade horror series or something. But yeah, that's one that I remember having a lot of fun reading, and I never hear people talk about it.
Andy Smith just sent me that book.
Oh, really?
Like a month ago in the mail, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how much like middle grade YA you read, but I definitely enjoyed it when I read this. And I read this as an adult when I was in college. So I think it should work well for adult readers.
Kind of going off with young adult, although this is a very new one. And I'm still so sad. It's been out for quite a while. It still has less than 1,000 reviews, and I love it so much. And that is Each of Us a Desert by Marco Shiru. I don't understand why people have not been reading this book. So, especially because so much time on BookTube specifically, people are like, oh, I'm so done with young adult. It's always the same things. Like, these are things people complain about. I don't, because if I want something tropey, I like that I know what I'm getting. But Each of Us a Desert is everything you want. If you want a non-traditional young adult, it is actually very retrospective and slow-paced. It's a future dystopian fantasy with really cool world-building intrigue. Like, I'm a big world-building person when I read, and you get dropped into this world, and you're just trying to figure out, why is this society the way that it is? What happened to this world? And you follow it through the eyes. Her name is Xochi, and she has this really big role in her community. She has to take everyone's stories and give them back to the god Solis. And this is really draining on her. It's like an actual physical ordeal. And she's told she has to do this, or else everyone who has these stories they need to confess will create monsters and bad things will happen. And she can't take it anymore. She's like 14 and having to do all of this. So she goes on an adventure. She meets people. We learn other people's stories, which gives us context for the world. And I'm normally not a journey person. Like, I normally actually despise a story where we're just walking for a long period of time. And I loved it here. And I loved her journey with her relationship to her religion as she's trying to figure out, well, what do I believe? Because maybe what I was told is not 100% what I thought was fact. What is in this world? Where are we at now? Where is my place in the world? Like, these are all great coming of age questions that I think are handled so well in such a unique setting with such a beautiful authorial voice. I did listen to this with audiobook, which I'm always hesitant to recommend because it has a lot of Spanish words. I'm also someone who loves any Latinx works I can get my hands on. And I'm not a fluent speaker, but the words that were used weren't a problem for me. And like, it's fantasy. How often are we used to made up words? These are just words in a language that exists. But I thought it was done so well. It also has like some nice light, creepy vibes in the intrigue of the world building, because you're really trying to figure out what is, you know, part of this fantasy world. What is just something we just don't understand? And I don't know. I really love it. I cannot believe it only has like 700 ratings. I don't understand. Like, also, because Marco Shiru is an author who has a very popular young adult, I feel, Anger is a Gift, which I have not read, but that's another work by them. And I just don't know how this slipped out. Maybe it's because it came out during the Pandora's box. I don't know. But, and like, it is slower paced. Like, I feel like when people read young adult, they really like don't expect that, but it is like a very introspective story. It's about Xochi being like, here's how I got here, and thinking it through. And I really liked her. I thought she was definitely a character who all the decisions she made sense to her. And I really value that in a teenage character. Like, teenagers for me can make dumb decisions, but I have to have buy-in to those dumb decisions, you know? I don't want it to be a plot device, and I didn't feel that here. So that's me.
My recommendation is arguably more science fiction than fantasy, but I have decided that it counts. It's fantasy enough, which is Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayden. Okay. Trying to describe this one is a little bit weird, so bear with me.
I've heard of this one. I'm so interested in it.
I have their other work, Prey of Gods, on my list, so I feel you. They're very sci-fi, fantasy.
It's very sci-fi. So the premise is we're following two girls that live inside of a giant space beast. Their culture, in order to survive, they go inside of these space beasts and essentially harvest their biological energy and their biological output in order to fuel the society's technology, provide food, etc. So again, a little bit hard to describe, but just trust me on this. It's good. It makes sense in the story. It is a very slow moving, very character focused. Our two characters that we're following, one of them, she's the daughter of a leader, and the other one is someone who has been demoted. So she's doing the job that nobody wants inside of this giant space beast. Without getting too into detail, it is a little bit gory-ish. I wouldn't describe it as super gory, but obviously if you're squeamish, it takes place inside of a giant space beast. So there's guts, bile, other things that bodies produce, frequently mentioned in this book. If you're not a fan of that, there's also some light horror, cosmic horror elements in it as well. But all of that is a positive for me. I like that stuff. It works, and I really, really liked the world building in this book because it's just so different from anything that I've read before, and you really buy in. It's not just the visceral gimmick of, oh, we're in a giant space beast and it's gross. Like, the society has distinct hierarchies, they have distinct culture, and it's not all just literally being inside of a space beast. It really feels like a fully realized culture, and they're also inside of a giant space beast.
Have you read The Prey of Gods by Nikki Drayden? Because that's the only one I've read, and I'm excited about this one.
I have not, but I have that on my TBR. And this is also sapphic, just to toss that in there, as an extra little bonus for reading it. But yes, I do want to read that book as well, and more books by her, because really intrigued by this. This also has a sequel too that just came out.
I was going to say, it looks like the sequel just came out.
Yeah, I haven't read that one yet, but I have obviously read this one since I'm talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this holds for Escaping Exodus, but based off The Prey of Gods, that author's imagination is off the charts, and I love reading all of the weird stuff she puts on the page. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's really unlike any other book that I've read, quite honestly. There's so much in here that was just very evocative and very visceral. Like, I couldn't really see this being a movie, but as you're reading it, it's so vivid that you can picture exactly what's happening in each scene, which is something I really liked about her writing as well.
That's interesting, because when I was reading The Prey of Gods, I was talking to a friend, and I was like, this feels like a really intense bingeable TV show I'm watching. Like, for each chapter, I was really into the drama. So I also had a similar, I wouldn't maybe put this on screen, but it reminded me of feelings I had while consuming visual media.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the plot is something where I don't know if this would be, if this would make it to television or into theaters, but it has a very cinematic tone to it. Even though it is very slow moving, it's not the slowest moving in the world. It still has a nice quick pace to it as you're reading it. That's on that.
Nice. I've heard a lot of people talk, not a lot, but a few people talk about it, and I've had it recommended to me personally, so I hope to read it soon.
The cover is beautiful.
It is, yeah.
I just got a copy at a used bookstore, and I'm obsessed, so.
The one I have is a unicorn. It's a standalone epic fantasy, and it is the Barbed Coil. Oh, can you see? The Barbed Coil by J.V. Jones. So J.V. Jones is kind of an oft-forgotten pioneer of the grimdark genre. And for whatever reason, when people talk about grimdark, and they always mention Joe Abercrombie and George R. R. Martin, and she seems to be left off the list. So she's more well known for her Sword series, which I read the first 3 books of, and they were good. But I think this is a better starting point because it's finished and it's a standalone. And it is a portal fantasy, and so it's set in following this woman who is leaving a tumultuous relationship, and she has decided that she's going to just drive in the woods, clear her mind, and it's there that she stumbles across a crime scene. And at the crime scene, she goes out to look around, and she sees this ring on the ground with these thorns sticking out of it, and she picks it up, and it pricks her, and when it pricks her, it transports her into this epic fantasy world where she finds out that her natural affinity for understanding like visual patterns has a magical like impact in this world and consequences. And she becomes kind of important, and she's almost immediately sucked into this like political intrigue storyline. And there's a bit of romance in this, and in typical J.V. Jones fashion, there's a lot of gore. She really not a lot, but like when she decides that she's going to describe like dead bodies and blood and stuff like that, she goes there. It is a little bit gross, but I also find her like writing quite beautiful, and like what she chooses to compare things to and metaphors and stuff like that are just like not what you would typically think of. And yeah, it's just really good. She kind of like starts off with this partnership with this kind of like mercenary figure to kind of bring down this political situation where this guy is like trying to invade something he shouldn't. So anyway, it's really good. I really like the characters. I liked the like little romance that you got between the two of them. It wasn't the focus of the story, but it was really well handled. And I just like the fact that like you got this portal fantasy where it was just like this adult woman in her late 20s trying to figure her life out and having an early midlife crisis that sends her to an epic fantasy world.
That's not relatable at all.
I love Portal Fantasies. That sounds so interesting, especially with it being a standalone. I'm super intrigued.
The only like major criticism I had about the book was that like everyone just kind of seems to accept her like out of the blue presence from midair as like completely normal. Like no one's ever like has a conversation of like, where you're from, like water comes out of a tap. Like, like there's never any, but other than that, it's a really good book.
That's funny.
You know, sometimes things are just too weird and you just decide, I didn't see that. Like, that was a mistake. I blinked.
Speaking of unicorns, nice segue from Chris's recommendation. I want to recommend a science fantasy called Space Unicorn Blues by T.J. Berry. This was published by Angry Robot Books a couple of years ago. It has a sequel out now, which I haven't read, but this one actually works pretty well as a standalone. And it takes place in space, but it has all the magical fey creatures. It has unicorns, it has fairies, elves, witches, you name it, it has it, but it's set in space. And the way that faster than light travel works is through grinding unicorn horns. And that's why unicorns are very sought after. And unicorns have sort of disappeared from space because like they've been sought after and trapped because of the importance of their horn. And the main character is a half unicorn. And at the start of the novel, he is released from prison for reasons that I won't tell you because it's basically the crux of his character development throughout this book. This has lots of very interesting representation. It has a very like found family-esque mood to it. All of these characters have like really complicated pasts where they like. If you thought that Gideon the Ninth had a nice redemption between like enemies to friends sort of thing, this does it better with a much more earned resolution to the main like relationship. And it's basically all about these former enemies, co-criminals coming together. It has a transgender character. It has the other protagonist is a wheelchair user. And the main character is an aromantic asexual. So it has a lot going for it. And it's also like super funny. The only gripe that I have with it is that there is one character in here who is basically like so like over the top douchebag. That like he's basically the punching bag of the entire group, and I just feel like the author is taking like she's having that character be there just sort of like an easy punching bag for like for the other characters to write off from. But other than that, this is just such a fun, not so serious book. I will also mention that it has some gory scenes in it. So it's like I would look into trigger warnings before you pick it up. But I really enjoyed it when I read it.
You
That
had
sounds
me when
really
you told me.
good.
Yeah.
I remember when that book came out, and I remember I didn't want to read it because I thought the cover of it was really similar to Space Opera by Catherine M. Valenti, and for some reason those two books got like interlinked in my mind, and I had like no desire to read Space Opera, and so like I was like, I don't know why, but that actually sounds really good.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with space. It's very different.
That sounds way better than what I got with Gideon. I have very mixed emotions about Gideon, and I'm just like, because it was sold to me as a sci fantasy, and I don't think it's a sci fantasy, and it makes me sad.
I mean, I just sort of like, I liked Gideon the Knight, but like, I have like, here's the thing, because I'm a professional salt mine, so I just like I will find things to gripe about in books. So I mean, for me, Gideon the Ninth was like a center of the mill kind of read, but
it was for me too. I feel like it was like a sci-fi fantasy setting, but it was more of like a competition turned murder mystery.
I hated it.
DNF'd
and I tried to read it together.
I mean, we tried to buddy read it, and then Jenna just gave up after like 70
I can't
pages.
finish it. I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'm not strong enough.
But I mean, if you liked Gideon the Ninth, I'm saying you might like this. But also, if you didn't like Gideon the Ninth, but wanted some of that enemies to friends thing, this does it better, in my opinion.
I guess I will go also with a standalone, but a middle grade. So let's see. Where's my head? Okay, can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
So I just read this, and this is such a great middle grade. The Lani of the Distant Sea by Erin and Tarada Kelly. And it is standalone middle grade secondary world fantasy, but inspired by Filipino folklore. And so it is so just really, really cool in terms of the world building. It's a dark fantasy. It kind of verges on horror at times. I think that also, like, if you read a lot of traditional folklore itself is kind of horrific. Like, there's lots of really dark stuff that happens, and that's very much what happens in this story. So it follows a little girl, Lalani, who lives in this on this island called San Laguita, and it's a really rough life. So she lives in a small fishing town, and like there's a drought, and there's never enough resources, and they've got like a really strict kind of guy who's in charge of the town that makes everybody stick to strict work schedules. I mean, like, it's rough, and things get worse. And there's this other island called Isa that is sort of this mythical island that every year a bunch of the men from the village will sail to go find, because it's supposed to have magic and good fortune and all these great things, but they never come back. So like her dad was one of those people who never came back. There's so many people who never came back, but things get so bad in San Laguita, and all of these people that she cares about are really suffering, that she decides she has to try to make the journey herself. And so it's about her journey and all of these magical creatures that she encounters. And it has that kind of like epic mythological feel of, it turned off, sorry, of like that hero who's going through all of these trials. But it also follows some storylines of her friends, and it looks at a lot of questions of like moral quandaries, and like, when do you stand up for things, and when do you sacrifice yourself, and what, should you persevere or should you fall in line? And it's just so good. So I really, really loved this. I read a lot of middle grade fantasy. I think that they do a great job of tackling a lot of really tough issues, but in a way that's also just super engaging and easy to read, and like, it's a standalone, so it's great.
That sounds really interesting. Okay, so we are coming up on the hour mark. So what I think I want to do, but we've only talked about 2 recommendations each. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one more recommendation around the way we've been doing it, and then we'll do a last like lightning round where we just like pitch one more after that, because I know what like the next 2 I really wanted to mention. So just so you guys can plan which one you want to talk about next.
Decisions.
I know we all have so many that we wanted to talk about. Okay, the next one I want to mention, I was actually really surprised at the number, like the low number of reviews on Goodreads, because I feel like I've heard about it from a decent amount of people on BookTube, but also not that many people have read it. And that's going to be The Queens of Innisleer by Tessa Grattan.
Yeah.
This is a King Lear retelling that is fantasy, obviously. And I loved this book. It's definitely very slow moving, very character focused. And I think that it takes a long time to kind of get into because there's a lot of politics going on and she has to like set up the world. And you get to know the different characters and how they're like related to each other, but it's, you know, it's a bit of a family drama. I actually read this without really knowing what the retelling original was. What did I just say it was?
King Lear.
King Lear.
It's like a Shakespearean story that I didn't love in high school. That one.
I never read it, and I also didn't realize it was a tragedy. And this book had me sobbing at the end. I do kind of cry easily at the end of books, but I was not expecting to cry as much as I did. And so, like, most of the time when I was reading this, I was like, this is interesting. I like the characters. I like the politics. The world is interesting. But, like, I didn't really have that many emotions about it until the end when, like, the more tragic stuff started happening. And I just started to see it was like watching, like knowing a train wreck was coming and watching it happen. And I just was like so upset by the ending. And it made me really emotional and was one of my favorite books that I read in whatever year that I read this. I think it was in early 2019.
Oh no.
Oh no.
I don't know what's
It's on
happened
Goodreads.
today.
I was so surprised.
Oh.
You left
Okay,
us for a
we're
second.
back.
So.
For a second, yeah. I was surprised it has less than 3,000 ratings on Goodreads because I have heard a decent amount of people mention it because I heard about it from BookTube, but I guess not that many people have actually read it. And I do think it'll be hit or miss with people. Like it's, you know, it's not fast paced and fun, but family drama, tragedy, interesting world and interesting like royal politics stuff. I think if that sounds interesting to you, you should definitely give this one a try.
Nice.
Yeah, I think part of the issue with that one is it's not sold in many bookstores, which
Oh,
is
really?
going to go. Well, at least I haven't seen it, and I go to a lot of like indie bookstores and like Barnes and Nobles and Books a Million, and I judge them all harshly, but I really like my indie one because they do a good job of putting new releases and diversifying the shelves. But my next one is a popular one, but it's not popular in the real world, and I even looked, and it's not even as popular as later series in the entry, and I'm really upset that the Liveship Traders series does not get as much love as the Tawny Man series. It's driving me crazy. So
Fun fact, the Liveship Traders series is the only one in Robin Hobb's Elderling series that is not translated into Finnish.
Whoa.
See, the
Others are
disrespect
translated
on
into
this series
Finnish.
because they're like, well, everyone loves Fitz, which a lot of people do. I'm like lukewarm on Fitz. Fitz is fine. Don't love him or hate him. But Liveship Traders is like the creme de la creme of like 90s fantasy, and everyone else is just talking about all these other white dudes, and it's never on the shelf. It's never in my used bookstore. I want illustrated editions like they're doing for Farseer.
Yes.
Do I think that's going to happen? I looked it up. Ship of Magic has 68,000 ratings. The first book in the Tawny Man series has 80,000 ratings.
So people just skip it? Angela, have you read the third one yet?
No, I haven't started Ship of Destiny yet. The last book
So
in
good.
Farseer has over 100,000 ratings. And normally when you go to the end of the trilling, it really goes down.
Down, yeah.
I am so upset about it because it's so good.
I know, like, whenever I'm on a lot of Robin Hobb fan forums and stuff like that, as well you would expect, and I know so many people who just choose to go from Farseer to Tawny Man, and I do not get it. I do not get why you would skip that part of the story. And in my opinion, it is the best epic fantasy trilogy like ever. Like just as a standalone trilogy, it's amazing.
I'm 50% through Madship right now, and things just got really interesting. I mean, they were already interesting, but something happened in what I read yesterday that I was like, oh, I really like where this is going. So I was buddy reading it with Angela and Stephanie, but they've already finished it and they're really behind. So I need to update you, Angela, but I am really enjoying this series. I can't believe so many people skip it.
Yeah, and as someone who, like, I was also put off when I heard about the Realm of the Elderlings, as one does when you enter BookTube, because it will happen to you eventually. And I was like, wait, is this like a whole long series? And I'm like, I'm going to get invested in this person, but the next series is not about them, and it's about pirates. And I'm not, some people love pirates. I'm like, that's not a buzzword for me. It's not an anti-buzzword, but it's not like a, ooh, intrigue. But I'm also a completionist, though, so I would never skip it.
Same.
I really liked Farseer. It was really good, probably a 4.5 star series for my taste. I have been trying to tell myself not to spend $150 on the UK hardbacks in used form. I love it so much. Like, I need you guys to understand that it is infinitely better for me than Farseer. So if you follow me and know my taste, just like understand it's another level of character work and thematic content and just storytelling, like tension.
I mean, understandably, like Farseer starts out very well, but then it has Assassin's Quest at the end, capping it off. So it's kind of like
Well, and I was also so nervous because Assassin's Quest is long, but I felt it was long, and I was like, oh gosh, Liveship, every book's 800 plus pages. What's going to happen? And they're all very well paced.
They fly. I can't.
I am planning on reading the trilogy this summer, so
it's a really good summer read too, because like a lot of time spent on boats, and it's like hot, and you kind of feel it while you're reading, and like the saltiness of the sea. Oh, it's really good.
Yeah, I'm gonna be living my yacht fantasy.
Yeah. They're long, but because there's a cast of characters, like it's a huge, pretty big cast of characters, it doesn't feel as long because there's so many different point of views.
Oh, I know. And it has the best villain work I've ever seen.
Yes.
So many, or even like characters that like are really aggravating and annoying. Like I just have such strong feelings about so many characters, and then also like mixed feelings about some of the like villain characters. And it's like sometimes you see glimpses of them. We're getting too far into it, but Matchship is the second one, and I'm in the middle of the second one, and I'm really enjoying it. So definitely, can't believe people are skipping Liveship Traders. I recommend it too.
Yeah, like I said, it's definitely the most popular one. I let myself write down, but I'm also just like the real world and the BookTube world is skipping it, and I don't like that.
It needs like its own mini series or something to like boost its real life popularity. Like even if it was like a 10 episode mini series, just tell the story. It would be great.
It's such good drama. It is such good family drama. Like the people who love family drama like stuff on HBO and everything. It's so good. It's so tense. Totally. But anyways, I've gone on long enough. Jenna, what's your next one?
All right. So one thing I read a lot of is media tie-in novels, because when I am like obsessed with something, I just want to get my hands on every possible thing that I can. So I do have one of those to recommend, but it is a pretty accessible one, which is Reflection by Elizabeth Lim, who's the author of Spin the Dawn. And this is based off of the Disney Mulan, the animated one. So it's a what-if story if instead of Mulan getting injured in the film, if Shang took the blow for her and he ends up going into the underworld and she has to go into the underworld to try and save him. So it's very focused on those two characters specifically. So if you're a big fan of the animated movie and specifically those characters and that relationship, you're really going to like this because there's a ton more interaction between the two of them since it's a book versus a hour and a half long movie. That's all I've got on this one. I don't really have a lot of in-depth thoughts on it. It's very fine. If you're a fan of the animated movie, I'm not going to talk about the live action one. I don't want to acknowledge it, but this is definitely far superior. If one were to want more Disney Mulan content rather than watching the live action movie, I would recommend checking out the book by Elizabeth Lim, and she's a very great writer as well, so it's very enjoyable.
Is she the one that's coming out with the Six Cranes book with that gorgeous cover?
It's Crimson Cranes, yeah.
Okay, because man, she is getting really lucky with those cover artists because that has a beautiful cover too.
Yeah.
Wow.
The UK cover for that one Six Crimson Crowns is really pretty.
Beyond amazing.
That one's coming out on July 6th. But I've heard good things about her other duology too. So I've been interested, The Spin the Dawn, which was like pitched as like Mulan meets Project Runway. And the Project Runway part really like turned me off. But I've heard from a few people that like that's a very small part of the book and that it's a lot more like, I don't know, hopefully I don't get this wrong, but like there's a lot of political drama and that it's like actually really pretty good. So I was like, I don't want to read about a fantasy Project Runway. That sounds silly.
It is about the competition with regards to tailoring, but Project Runway is such a specific like concept. This is not it.
Yeah.
But to say, I feel like it's one of those times where we're accidentally comparing something to Game of Thrones or Harry Potter, but we really mean a specific trope. And we're like, in this case, it's like, there is a competition with clothes. That's your Project Runway. Like, I think, I haven't read it. But.
Okay. Similar to Angela, this book, when it came out in 2001, I think. And it was a USA Today bestseller, New York Times bestseller, but it's a very adult book. And so a lot of people my age who are like 5-6 years old when that book came out have probably not read it, and I never see it talked about on BookTube. And I read the first book about a month ago, and I'm finishing up the trilogy now, and it has consumed me.
I know which one you're talking
Kushiel's
about.
Dart by Jacqueline Carey. Oh my God. So I will say, I had my issues with this book. It was like a solid 4-star read. The second book blew my mind. In my top 10 fantasy books of all time. So this series is a little bit hard to describe, so I'm going to try my very, very best. It is an alternative historical fantasy. It is set in medieval Europe, but the religions in this world worked out a little bit differently. So in this world, the world's version of Jesus dies on the cross. His name is Yeshua ben Yosef, and when he dies, the Lady Magdalene weeps over his body, and the tears of her weeping, the blood of Yeshua, and the earth mingle to form a second immaculate conception and gives rise to Elua. The true God rejects his grandson Elua as not legitimate, and then he is not allowed into heaven, basically. And so he's forced to wander the earth, and when he wanders the earth, he preaches this gospel to love as thou wilt. He's eventually arrested by the king of Persis, and the angels beg God to break him out of prison. He refuses, and so they rebel against him to break Elua out of prison. And when they do, they become his like disciples and wander with him across this world, and they mingle with the humans, and they end up giving having a whole bunch of kids, basically. And so a whole new like angelic race of people comes to be, and they live in this country called Terra d'Ange. That's all like ancient history at this point where the story actually starts. But important for like understanding like the plot is that one of these angelic companions of Elia was a woman named Nama, and Nama would sell her body in order to feed and house Elua, and would like do all sorts of sex work to protect everybody. And so sex work in this world ends up having a religious sanctification to it, and it's considered like holy. And so our main character in this book is a woman named Phaedra, who, when she's very young, her mother sells her into the night court, which is like the system of sex work, basically. And she is raised in the night court, but she's considered like spoiled goods because she has like a scarlet mote in her eye. And so it's considered like this terrible flaw. And when she's about 12 or 13, she's noticed by a man who's kind of on the outskirts of noble society named Anafiel Deani. And he notices this like scarlet mote and identifies it for what it really is, which is the mark of one of the angelic companions named Kushiel, so that she is a scion of his line, which means that she's like forced to experience pain and pleasure at the same time. And so she basically is then raised into like BDSM prostitution, which sounds like, it all sounds so bizarre, right? It's not. It is like Game of Thrones level political, because it turns out that the guy that like buys her mark and pimps her out is like raising her to be a spy and giving her this like incredible education. And he's like trying to uncover this like incredible conspiracy amongst the royal line. and there's all these like political families that you got to keep track of, and she like uses her sex work to be able to like spy on people, and like she's really smart and like one of the most like amazing heroines I've ever come across. And like I just freaking love these books. The politics are complicated. like you do have to really be on your toes, because like Jacqueline Carey just doesn't really hold your hand a lot through a lot of this. Like you just have to be expected to keep track of all these different people, and it is freaking brilliant. The book turns into like an adventure quest halfway through, and there's like all these like supernatural elements, and I feel like so many people see the cover and hear like the concept like that's just erotica, but it's not. Like it is literally, I think this is better than Game of Thrones. I think this is better written. I think the politics are better handled. I think the characterization is deeper. I adore it. Like I have been completely blew me out of the water.
I think we should also note that Chris actually likes Game of Thrones.
I do. Like I love Game of Thrones. It's just
not everyone likes it, so I just figured that's another plus for the book.
I think
I also
incredible.
love A Song of Ice and Fire, but I am also the first to point out that it doesn't take much to be better than A Song of Ice and Fire. So
being
That
finished
book
is
sounds super weird. Like I've definitely heard of Kushiel's start and seen it around, but I definitely thought it was like like fantasy romance with heavy male gaze, like just from the cover, and like I haven't heard that much about it. So I'm definitely more intrigued, but I'm still, I don't know, the whole BDSM thing, I don't know.
It does have some parts in it where you're just like, you just kind of have to like accept it. You know what I mean? But I freaking love it. And it's not like, I will say this, the sexual content in the later books goes down. So like in the first book, like the first half of the first book is a lot of very explicit sexual content. The second half, not so much. And then in the second book, and really as the series goes on, it goes down a lot more, because she eventually, not to like spoil too much, doesn't continue living her life as active of a prostitute as she does in the beginning. But I loved it. Like, just
Yeah, I mean, you definitely made
blew me
it sound a lot more interesting than I thought it was.
Okay. How to
Follow
even
that one up.
Follow that.
Well, this series also deals with sex work, but like anyway, this is Melusine by Sarah Monette and the Virtu by Sarah Monette. These are the first two books in the Doctrine of Labyrinths quartet. And speaking of underrated, this is probably the most underrated I have, because Ace Books actually let these books go out of print. So now you can only find them in like ebook library system and used basically. And Sarah Monette had to change her pen name to Catherine Addison because of the association to these books, which I don't understand, because they are good. Basically, in this world, there are like nobility who are also like magic users, and the noble magic users essentially like run these towns, and Melusine is the is basically a city state. This world consists of a lot of like independent city states and also like other countries, and it has a very interesting world building system. Like everything is based on the number 7. So you have like septads, like, and like everything is like divisible by 7. So you have like days of the week are divisible by 7. How the day rhythm is, it's not 24 hours, it's like something 7 hours and such. So it's very interesting. And there's also like different modes where you have like 2 point of view characters in these first books. You have Felix Harrogate, who is a wizard who gets disgraced in this really explicit ritual, which causes him to basically lose his mind. So he spends a majority of the first book basically insane. And the other character is Mild May the Fox, who is an assassin and also this assassin does assassinating in this quartet, so that's a mind-blowing thing. I would also say that this is an interesting secondary world fantasy that is sort of like, I would say, soft grimdark. And it's also kind of like urban fantasy without urban fantasy tropes necessarily. It doesn't have like fake creatures or anything like that, but it is definitely set in a city. Like all of the settings in all of these books are basically urban settlements, and it's very like steampunky. And a lot of the theming in these books is, first of all, queer themes. The main character is a gay man, and also theming of like nurture versus nature, and also basically people trying to resurrect ancient magical artifacts and the consequences of meddling with things that you don't know anything about, historically or otherwise, and how maybe meddling with them wasn't such a good idea. That's basically it. So I highly recommend
this is the same author who does like the Goblin Emperor that everyone talks about?
Yes, this was her debut series. This was what got me. Like, these are the hardbacks. These are the first edition hardbacks. I found her through LiveJournal of all places and got this book.
Yes.
Oh, what a throwback.
How would you say it compares to her work as this Catherine Addison? Because I've read The Goblin Emperor, and I'm like the only person in the world who did not like that book. And then I also read, I tried to read her Sherlock Holmes retelling that just came out, The Angels of the Crows, and I really struggled with it.
I mean, I have that one currently parked because I have struggled with it too. I absolutely adored and loved The Goblin Emperor. These are a very different beast.
Okay, I might try those.
First of all, they are multi-POV. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that they are maybe... First of all, they are a lot darker. And The Goblin Emperor is basically more like... It's more hopeful and more like the main character tries to believe the best of others for the most part. In this, the main character of Felix Harrogate is a complete and utter piece of shit.
Okay.
And that's the best part about him, because all the other characters also consistently call him out on it, and it is the best. And like, he is very also unapologetic about it. He's very much like, I own up to the fact that I am a terrible human being. But he also tries his best.
I'll give it a go. I do like the covers.
Yeah, they're very like weirdly Photoshop photos. Like, I shouldn't like them, but somehow they work.
I like them.
I also have queer fantasy. That is something I really, really loved. Have you heard of this? So this is A Taste of Honey by Kai Ashante Wilson. Some people have probably heard of The Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps. And this one is really, really good, but it's also a little abstract. It's very poetic. This one is a little bit less kind of poetic and abstract, but I really loved it because it was so sweet. It's a romance. So it takes place in this fantasy with a little bit of science fiction world that is maybe inspired by Roman times. Sort of Roman times in North Africa. And you've got this guy who is a teenager kind of coming of age, and it's his story of coming of age and trying to make decisions about his life. And he meets this like Roman type soldier who he falls in love with, but definitely same-sex relationships are not cool in his world. Like his hometown, they're okay in like the Roman one, but not in his. And his family is trying to set up a political alliance for him to marry like a princess, basically. And so he has to make a lot of really hard decisions about, you know, who is he and what does he want to do? And he also is like a magic user. And so just like, does he use his skills and his body really to fulfill his family's kind of political aspirations and go along with what society wants? Or does he throw it all away, like throw away all of that future and try to go back home with this Roman soldier because he's fallen in love? And it's kind of like an insta lust So they kind of just get involved, but then they get really attached over a short period of time. But the Roman soldier like has to leave, and so does he go with him? And so it's a novella. It's really short, but I loved the magic in it. I loved a lot of the questions in it, and I just really like Kai Shanti Wilson's writing.
Do you have to read the first novella to read this one?
Actually, this one I think takes place earlier in the timeline than The Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps. So like if this one takes place, let's say around an equivalent of the real world 0 AD or something, this one would take place maybe around the Middle Ages. So like in that kind of world, it's an older version, but they are also totally unrelated other than kind of the science fantasy world building.
Cool. Because I looked on Goodreads, I already have it as want to read from someone else I was following, and it's like number 2, and I'm like, I don't remember this number 2.
I would even hesitate to say companion novel. I would just say in the same universe.
Okay.
Good to know. All right. Now we're going to do a lightning round. Just quick, one last recommendation we want to throw in. Mine is another YA series. I used to read a lot more YA than adult. These days it's a little more even, maybe leaning more adult. And like I said, I've been reading a lot more things that are not underrated. So that's why so many of my recommendations are like older things that I've read. I want to recommend the Walk on Earth a Stranger series by Ray Carson. I was surprised that it has, I mean, it's not like super low, but it's got like 17,000, the first one, on Goodreads, less than 20,000. I was kind of surprised by that. And this is a YA historical fantasy series. It's a trilogy. The first one is called Walk on Earth a Stranger, and it's set during the American Gold Rush. And the main character, she can sense gold, which you can imagine is a very helpful thing to be able to do during the gold rush, but also kind of dangerous, because if people find out that you can do that, they might try to kill you or kidnap you. Not kill you, probably kidnap you, so they can use your powers. But I really like the main character in the series. She's smart and brave. There is a little bit of a romance, but I really enjoyed it. The first book is definitely a bit of a journey book, and it kind of gave me like Oregon Trail vibes, because she's like crossing the US with a bunch of people in like wagons and stuff, and like there's people that you can't really trust. I'm not doing this very quickly. I recommend this one. In a setting that I haven't read a lot about. I thought that it touched a lot on different political things that were happening in the US around this time. And I just thought that I just think it's really well done, and not enough people have read it and talked about it.
All right, I'll be really quick, because I honestly will accept you reading anything by this author, and the author's being less underhyped, but this is an underhyped series by them. The Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin. I couldn't not say N.K. Jemisin. Like, yes, she's very popular with her Broken Earth trilogy, and then no one reads anything else. Like, essentially, that's what happens on Goodreads. And this is their second series. It's completed. Also works as a standalone. It's Egyptian inspired. This one is her first written. So if you're someone who likes to go from an author's like first written work up to their most recent, this one was written first, but not published first. I really like N.K. Jemisin. There's a N.K. Jemisin chat on this Worldhoppers channel where we all gush about how amazing she is. So if you need to know more about why I want you to read any of her works, I will point you in that direction.
All right, this one is not underrated in the real world, but it is underrated on BookTube because it's a manga. So someone can yell at me in the comments, for it not being actually underrated. But that would be Berserk, which is a really long. Why that face? It's so. Actually, yeah, I do know why that face. The creator passed away recently. I know. Yeah, the creator passed away suddenly, very recently, which is really upsetting. But it is definitely still worth reading regardless, especially if you are into grimdark and you have never touched Berserk. You absolutely have to read it because it has influenced so much. Everything.
Dark Souls,
Game of Thrones,
Bloodborne,
Dark Souls. Yeah.
Final
Fantasy. And the art is just beautiful. I will say, it is very grimdark. There's lots of sexual assault, violence, gore, etc. So be aware of that if you get into it. But it's not It's not all sad. There's some happy moments.
How
There's some nice things.
how would you say it would work for someone trying to get into manga, like as a baby's first manga?
Yeah, maybe.
I would start
Okay.
maybe with like baby steps, something else.
Okay.
Start with Full Metal Alchemist. I would start
Yes,
there.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Full Metal Alchemist is very good, and then you can jump into Berserk. It's like,
Yeah.
like
Berserk is really dense, so like if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
not as comfortable with the format of manga reading it, I don't know if I would start there because each page has a lot of line art. There's lots of text on it, so that can be kind of overwhelming if you're not used to reading it in that format. But go look up the art anyway because it's absolutely stunning.
Chris, I believe in you. I think you can start there. You can do it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I will try
in
both.
terms of, sorry, I will just hop on Berserk just to say that in terms of accessibility, in terms of cultural things, it is very accessible to the Western audience.
Yes.
That said, it is definitely Asian storytelling cosplaying as medieval Europe. So
I'll try both out.
Yes, both are excellent. Fullmetal Alchemist is a very different vibe. That's also not underrated. Sorry, but that's also a very good one. That's more of a science fantasy, kind of in that realm, and it's definitely more open to new readers, especially if you're getting used to the manga format, which is going to be backwards for a lot of Western readers.
All right. Mine is Kate Glass's An Illusion of Thieves. This is the author Carol Berg. So if you guys have ever read any Carol Berg, this is the same author. She got a new pen name for this series. This is set in an alternative Renaissance era Italy, and it follows a woman who was a courtesan to a very upper class noble in this city called Catania. It's illegal to practice magic in this world. Both she and her brother are magic users. Her brother ends up using magic in a way that's very indiscreet. He gets caught, and because of the shame that's put on her, she is cast out of this man's family, where she had been like this kind of upper class courtesan and mistress. And now she has to rebuild her life from scratch. She becomes a scribe in the poorer districts and is slowly sucked into intrigue and kind of has to pull off these kind of heists using her skills as a magic user. And there's very much this like found family element of her like assembling her crew and stuff like that. I really like it. I like the fact that the protagonist, I don't know if they ever specifically say her age, but she reads like somebody who's in her 30s at least, which I really like. And
What's the name of it again?
An Illusion of Thieves. The actual trilogy itself is called the Chimera trilogy, and they're very they're fantasy books, but they're only like 350 pages each, around there. So they're like great one-off adventures, and I've got the third book, and I need to read it.
Okay, so I am also going to be recommending a manga for my last recommendation, and I feel like it is also kind of overlooked on the manga side of YouTube, but definitely overlooked on the bookish side. So I'm just like, if you want to get into manga, this is perfect. Delicious in Dungeon by Ryoko Kui. It is an epic fantasy cooking manga where basically there are these dungeons that pop up in the world, and the dungeons basically attract people and then end up creating their own sort of macro economies inside the dungeon. And there's this group of adventurers who goes into the deeper levels of the dungeon, ends up losing their one of their party members to a dragon who basically eats her. And then they have to go back to the dungeon, and they have to be fast because they want to be able to resurrect her before the dragon digests her. And because they ran out of money during their previous attempt to clear the dungeon, they have to eat the monsters that they are meeting up. And it is so humorous. It is absolutely wonderful, but also it has such a beautiful found family story in it because they meet all these other adventurers and end up forming alliances and friendships. And also it has a surprisingly deep world building, and it just keeps getting epic. So first you think that you are getting a comedy cooking manga, and then you're a few volumes in and you're like, oh my god, I'm reading an epic political, like, what? It's great. It's one of my favorite mangas that is currently running. I think 9 volumes are currently out in English. Definitely recommend it.
It's got a lot of cooking, like detailed instructions too, and it's really cute.
And like nutritional value details. If you want to know how like a kelpie, what nutritional value a kelpie has, that manga has you covered.
I think my quick recommendation is going to be New Suns. Yeah, Angela, I know this is on your list. So this is edited by Nisi Shawl. It is a anthology of SFF. So it includes some like horror, some sci-fi, some fantasy, with a real focus on kind of like diversity and marginalized authors. So basically voices that you don't hear a ton of. And also she specifically asked the authors to submit like the story that they couldn't submit anywhere else. So there's a lot of really like interesting things in here, lots of very cool political commentary about experiences that different people have, but also just totally new world building and all sorts of things. There's some authors you might recognize like Rebecca Roanhorse and Sylvia Moreno Garcia, but there's also authors that like I'd never read before. So if you want to try to find more authors, like reading an anthology like this is great. And this one's not too big. So it wouldn't take you that long to read. And the great thing about anthologies is if you don't like a story, just skip that one and go to the next one. And so it's just a really great way to find a couple new authors.
Can confirm Shannon does not fear DNFing short stories.
Yeah, I think I DNF like 25% of the stories that we buddy read in Sunspot Jungle. So.
I wish I had your ability, because I was just like, yeah, you're right, that story wasn't worth my time, but I'll tell you what happened because I'm the one who read it.
And I feel like with short stories, it's like, oh, it's not that long. It won't take, like, it's not that much time. So I'll just persevere.
It became a game. I started guessing which ones she wouldn't finish. I would leave her a message like, I don't think you would have finished this one. So let me tell you what happened and why I'm responding in this way.
I DNF anything that has like gross things. Like I'm super squeamish. So Escaping Exodus was one where like I DNF that really early on because it was so cool in the world building. But oh my God, the amount of like bodily fluids, I was just like, I'm out. I can't do this. And Sunspot Jungle had quite a bit of horror.
So. Yeah, I also think, buddy, reading a short story collection that long with someone, you really get to know someone's taste. Like now I feel way more confident, or I know when I'm on the line, it's like you're either going to love this book or you're going to hate it. Like there's no middle ground here for you in this work. So that was great for our reading friendship.
That's awesome. All right, guys. Well, I think we all got some really good recommendations today. I definitely added quite a few to my TBR. So, or like my nebulous TBR. I don't know if you guys watch the TBR tag, but like I don't have a normal TBR like some people do. But anyways, I hope you guys who are watching enjoy this video and enjoyed seeing some new faces here. Thanks everybody who joined. All of you guys, like I was so excited to bring this group of people together because, you know, you guys haven't been in a video yet and you guys read so eclectically and I just love your channels and I just wanted a chance for all of us to get together and chat about underrated fantasies. So thanks everyone for joining and we will see you guys in the next Worldhoppers video. Bye.